All right, let's jump right into this explainer and open up the pages of our dark, historical grimoire. We're going to explore the eerie folklore surrounding some of our most mysterious animal companions. For centuries, humanity has projected its deepest fears, its profoundest respect, and honestly, its darkest magic onto the animals that share our world. So today, we aren't just looking at animals, we're looking at them entirely through the lens of ancient superstition, witchcraft, and the supernatural.
I mean, we've all experienced that sudden, uncanny feeling, right? You're just sitting there in a quiet room and your pet suddenly freezes. Their eyes lock onto an entirely empty corner. They're unblinking, just tracking something that you absolutely cannot see. Are they just listening to a mouse in the walls? Or is it something else? Well, that unsettling feeling is completely valid because long before modern science stepped in to explain away these behaviors, our ancestors believed those exact moments were terrifying, undeniable evidence of the supernatural. They literally believed animals could see right through the veil between the living and the dead.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with messengers from the shadows, then look at how corvids act as harbingers of death, the alchemist's crucible of toads, cats as familiars and phantoms, and finally, how to actually read these supernatural signs. Kicking things off with Chapter 1, Messengers from the Shadows, the Animal Spirit Bridge. Okay, so long before the witch trials, indigenous and animistic cultures globally viewed animal spirits as protective, guiding companions. But in early modern Europe, this ancient bond was twisted into something deeply sinister. A familiar spirit was far more than just a pet. Our ancestors viewed these creatures as powerful agents, basically an intimate human-animal bond inverted through demonic influence. According to historical inquisitors and texts like the 1604 Witchcraft Act, these entities were literally demons in disguise. They assisted cunning folk and witches with harmful magic, and in return, the witch had to feed the familiar, often with drops of their own blood or milk. It was this terrifying, transactional relationship that completely blurred the lines between the natural world and the demonic.
Moving right along to Chapter 2, Corvids, the Harbingers of Death.
Think about the raven for a second. With their jet-black feathers, raspy calls, and intense, sharp intelligence, ravens and crows became the ultimate symbols of mortality across Europe. Corvids are inherently super smart and opportunistic, a combination that historically placed them at the very center of our absolute darkest myths. Because these birds are scavengers, they naturally gathered wherever blood was shed. Just imagine being an ancient soldier. Before the battle even starts, the ravens assemble, completely drawn by the familiar movements of the armies. To the human mind back then, it looked like they were predicting the future. Their presence on battlefields naturally linked them to war deities, prophecy, and the undeniable reality of death.
And because of that, their mythological resume is absolutely staggering. They were seen as psychopomps, creatures tasked with guiding wandering souls to the afterlife. In Celtic lore, they were the earthly form of the Morrigan, this terrifying phantom queen of war who would shriek over battlefields to disorient warriors and mark them for doom. Over in Norse myth, Odin's two ravens literally represented thought and memory, flying across the world to bring him secrets. But by the time we hit the European Dark Ages, amidst all the plague and famine, a raven's call wasn't just a bird sound, it was heard as a terrifying prophecy of tomorrow's death.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, Toads and the Alchemist's Crucible.
So while birds kind of ruled the skies, the damp, shadowy corners of the earth belonged to the toad. This is a creature that has been heavily associated with poison and black magic since the 1st century. Often found lurking at the edges of occult history, the lowly toad was weaponized by cunning folk in places like East Anglia and Somerset. In those regions, a witch might literally threaten a neighbor by simply saying, "I'll toady." That meant she would send her amphibian familiar to drain their cows of milk or bring illness into their home. But here's the thing. The magic of the toad wasn't just about sending it out to do harm. It was what was physically inside the toad that practitioners coveted the most.
Check this out. The infamous toad bone ritual illustrates the extreme lengths these practitioners of folk magic would actually go to. Basically, someone would bury a natterjack toad inside a copper pot right in the middle of an anthill. After the ants stripped the bones completely clean, they'd throw the entire skeleton into a flowing stream. They were looking for one specific bone, the one magical bone that defied gravity and floated upstream. Possessing this bizarre talisman was supposed to grant the owner supernatural control over animals, especially horses, and gave them immense power within the secretive society of the horseman's word.
But wait, the rabbit hole goes even deeper. A witch, keeping a toad familiar, was actually operating a living, breathing alchemical lab.
We know today that toads naturally excrete toxic alkaloids from their glands. Well, historical texts hint that witches would feed their toads snails and slugs that had just feasted on highly toxic plants like deadly nightshade and hemlock. The toad would then metabolize those plant toxins right alongside its natural venom. The witch would gently milk the toad's glands to harvest these incredibly potent mind-altering toxins to use in flying ointments and spells. Crazy, right?
All right, on to Chapter 4, Cats, Familiars and Phantoms. Talk about a massive public relations nightmare. No animal has experienced a more dramatic swing in human history than the cat. In ancient Egypt, they were practically divine, the living embodiment of the goddess Bastet. They protected grain stores, and killing a cat was literally a capital offense. But fast forward to medieval Europe, and the cat's independent nocturnal nature sparked intense, wild paranoia. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX actually issued a decree declaring that black cats were incarnations of the devil. This tragedy led to mass exterminations where cats were hunted and burned at festivals. And the tragic irony? Some historians suspect this culling may have actually worsened the spread of the Black Death by eliminating the natural predators of plague-carrying rats.
And these exact superstitions laid the concrete legal groundwork for the witch trials in Europe and eventually over in Salem. Take Agnes Waterhouse in England back in 1566. She confessed to owning a blood-drinking black cat named Satan that could grant wishes and murder livestock. Think about that. Specific confessions like this legally sealed the fate of marginalized women. By the time the Salem witch trials rolled around a century later, the idea of the demonic animal familiar was so deeply entrenched that just owning a black cat could be cited in court as evidence of a satanic pact.
Let's tie this all together in Chapter 5, Reading the Supernatural Signs.
If we step back into the mindset of our ancestors, the natural world was this intricate web of mystical communication. Traditional beliefs provided very strict, scary interpretations for animal behavior. A crow flying over your house exactly 3 times? That wasn't just a bird passing by. It was a guaranteed harbinger of imminent death or disaster. If a mourning family found a stray cat sleeping on a deceased loved one's shoes, it was seen as a direct message that the person's spirit was still lingering in the room. A sudden toad on your doorstep meant you were probably being hexed by a neighbor. And those glowing cat eyes staring down a dark hallway? Literal proof that the animal was watching unseen, supernatural energies.
And you know what's really fascinating? Even hundreds of years after the witch trials, long past the scientific revolution, we still hold on to these ideas. Modern paranormal investigators and mediums still firmly claim that our pets act as supernatural barometers. The ancient idea of the familiar spirit has definitely evolved, for sure, but that core belief, the idea that animals are tuned into a frequency we simply cannot hear, remains just as powerful today.
So, after all of this, we really have to ask. We know the history. We know the dark paranoia and the incredible, terrifying myths humans have projected onto the animal kingdom. But, next time your dog growls at an absolutely empty corner, or your cat tracks some invisible shadow creeping across the ceiling, just pause for a second. Are they just reacting to a draft, displaying standard animal biology, or are they tapping into that ancient, mystical bridge between the worlds and seeing something standing right next to you that you simply can't? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.